I have the honor of introducing our moderator for today, Dean Richard Lyons, who is actually the 14th Dean of Haas and a recipient of the Berkeley citation, which is such a high honor. Currently, Dean Lyons is Berkeley's Chief Innovation and Entrepreneurship Officer, as well as a professor of finance and economics at the Haas School of Business. And he has a numerous number of accomplishments. For a person like me who's interested in tech and entrepreneurship, his research in microfinance and cryptocurrency really stood out. But I think something that we all can really get behind are his current initiatives to make this campus an ecosystem for innovation and entrepreneurship for every single student. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the charming and charismatic Dean Lyons to the virtual stage as our moderator.
Thank you, Mega. Thank you, Vicky, the whole team that's put this wonderful Newton series together. And two just splendid guests that we have here today. I know many of you, as part of this class, have already taken inspiration from these two. I had the joy of being able to do a prep call with them and learned a ton on the prep call, and we have a lot to learn from them today. So thanks to both of you, Sylvia and to Liz. Why don't we, if we could, maybe we'll just kick off at the center of things, the passion, right? Where did the passion start? We'll start with you, Sylvia. The passion for our seas, for oceans. What was the starting point?
When I was about 3 years old, I got knocked over by a wave on the New Jersey shore. The ocean got my attention. And the life in the ocean intrigued me even at that stage. And it's held my attention all these years. Infinitely fascinating.
So really, the earliest, it felt like it was bigger and bolder and more important, even from an early age.
Absolutely. Still does.
I love it. Well, it must, given the life that you've had and continue to have. I mean, all of you saw that cover, the people who are changing the world. And so thank you for that. Liz, why don't we bounce the same question to you, please?
Well, it helped having a mother that was all wet all the time. And
take a lot of showers.
And my dad was an invertebrate zoologist as well. So we did just from a very early age growing up with, things like octopus and whelk in home aquariums in the kitchen, the aftermath of hurricanes, going out and gathering up all the animals that have been stranded, and just kind of grew up with that ethos of looking after the animals and after the planet. And then it's just kind of continued forth until we got to the point where we're really frustrated by only being able to get so deep into the water.
Gotta go deeper.
Got to go deeper
and stay longer.
And the first kind of scuba experience with her, she just said, "Here, put this in your mouth, breathe normally." And and I was about 9 or 10.
Wow.
And it's just kind of gone on from there.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, go deeper, go longer. I mean, the two of you in both of your lives, that idea that the frontier and moving the frontier, and in so many ways. So that's, much of what we'll talk about here today. I want to touch on very quickly the changemaker frame for this course and for a broader curriculum even. And many of the students, although not all, have taken a gateway course called the Berkeley Changemaker, and there is some magic that happens when those two words get put together, given the values that Berkeley is understood by, right? Values like questioning the status quo, values like stewardship for something larger. And in that course, there are 3 content pillars. One of them is critical thinking, right? How do we ask the right questions? What are the right questions? How do we continue to question ourselves and our own understanding? And a second element is collaboration, teamwork. So few amazing things, well, almost none get done in this day and age as individual contributors, right? We get things done with and through other people, and we don't early in our lives generally have as good a sense for how that team magic actually gets done. And the third, critical thinking, collaboration, is communication. How do you get a message heard? How do you paint a picture? So I'll come back to you, Sylvia, and when you think about the way you've thought about the deep questions, I mean, it's hard to think of somebody who's thought more deeply about the fundamental questions, but what feel like the fundamental open questions for you when it comes to our oceans?
People naturally, the big question is, who are we? Where did we come from? And maybe most importantly, where are we going? Or even more importantly, how are we going to get to wherever it is we aspire to go? And right now, I regard the present time as the sweet spot in civilization.
Mm.
Never before could we know what is now known. When you think what has been learned since the middle of the 20th century, when I first began exploring the ocean with scuba and later with submersibles and living underwater, we just could not imagine what the kids of today are just growing up with, the idea that you could be up in the sky and look back on Earth. The fact that when I was a kid, no one had been to the deepest part of the ocean. There still haven't been that many. About as many people have been to the deepest part of this ocean as have been on the moon. And that's in itself cause for reflection, because it can't be that hard, can it? It's only 7 miles down. Going to the moon is a lot further, and one would think a lot scarier, more difficult from an engineering standpoint. I mean, going down is so easy. Coming back is clearly, coming back alive is.
Round trips are the only ones that count.
But
Well,
we're just on the edge, I think, of the transformative ways of regarding ourselves, because before now, we couldn't see ourselves, and we could not see the urgency of really changing our ways. It's only about now that our habit of consuming nature that underpins our prosperity, always taking, mining, cutting trees, taking ocean wildlife, whatever it is, extracting from nature to foster our prosperity.
Yes.
And we're not alone. All creatures take from nature, but no species has so profoundly, so comprehensively altered the nature of nature through not only what we've taken, but how we have taken, with no real, now that we know, we continue to indulge ourselves by using raw materials, whatever it is, instead of really zeroing in on the need to make peace with nature, to understand that the natural systems keep us alive. And we're very close to reaching those tipping points that, unless we take action pretty soon, we're going to lose a chance to secure a stable environment. We're already seeing the consequences of our action, and lucky us, we can see it, we can measure it, we can define it. We know the cause. That's good news. We know what it is. We can therefore address the problems. We know what to do. The real problem is taking it seriously and doing what we know is the right thing to do, and doing it in time to make a difference.
Well, I mean, so many things that you just said. I mean, the idea of this is a sweet spot in civilization. That is a great phrase. And it's also got some optimism in it, right? We've got some pretty difficult challenges ahead, no question about that. I think part of what has always defined kind of your signature is that you have consistently seen so deeply into things, and yet you bring a frame, you paint a picture of hope and yes, we can, and the combination is absolutely outstanding.
Well, there's evidence, when you on the land or in the sea or in the air, imagine the consequences of the pandemic when everything kind of shut down. And suddenly the sky was bluer.
And we could hear birds.
And you could hear birds, and birds could hear birds.
And birds could hear birds, and whales could hear whales.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something that we mentioned even just in the pre-session is a little bit more time for reflection for many of us, right? We all used it a little bit differently. I think it was John Dewey, but a famous educator once said that we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience.
Right.
And I've always loved that quote. Whether our sort of enhanced capacity for reflection is something that will continue to serve us post this difficult COVID period, we shall see. But it's an important element of what may stick that could be positive. Liz, please.
Just one quick thing. Who knows whether it's true or not, but it is said that Sir Isaac Newton went through a pause when there was an epidemic of smallpox. And in his shutdown time, allegedly an apple fell on his head. And he thought about processes that maybe he thought about before, but something clicked.
Yes.
And somehow we don't give ourselves enough time just to have reflective pauses in our life.
Yeah. Well, I think some people are getting more, whether it's decoupling from technology or there are many kind of ways, going on a walk, but that I think links to another one of the wonderful nuggets in what you just said about ways of regarding ourselves, right? This sort of ability to see ourselves from out there for just a moment, right? Let's get out of body for a moment and watch this.
We're probably the only creatures who can see ourselves as part of the long sweep of time. I mean, I think elephants are really smart, and sort of dolphins and whales, and I know some pretty smart fish, birds, but they don't know about the history of the earth, how old it is.
Yes.
And neither did humans until fairly recently. Even Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring in the 60s and published in 1960 something, when she wrote a book about the ocean, the sea around us in 1951, the continents were thought to be stable, not moving around. We now know that, and we know why and how. And the age of the earth was thought to be much younger then than we now know it to be.
Yes.
And kids can ask anyone, how do we know? How do we come up with these things? How do we know what air is? And what's water? And how do we know that our bodies are filled with microbes, that we're an ecosystem each unto ourselves? Whales don't know, but we know. There's so much that gives us an edge, that we can know about the distant past, and somebody along the way invented letters and numbers, and we don't have to start from scratch with each new. And we have places like UC Berkeley, where you get this gift of accumulated knowledge that you can just soak it up and have a jump start for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And the idea, the hope is every generation is going to give back and have a better chance, know more, do better. And that's why right now, it's the first time that we've been able to put some of the pieces together. Computer technology that enables us to look at patterns.
Yes.
And to communicate instantly. Something is discovered on the other side of the planet, but it doesn't stay right there. It gets shared with the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And
we need to accelerate that, though.
We do. Yeah, we do.
Far too often where, something new breakthrough happens, but it's embargoed for a while.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see that accelerate so we could really make use of it faster.
Yeah, there was some terrific kind of international scientific cooperation, as we all know, around the COVID challenge and
absolutely
some others. But as you say, sometimes those habits are hard to renorm in a full and complete way. So turning to you, Liz, and thinking about some of the same, I mean, the questions that you, with more of a, specifically your engineering background and your idea that how do we go deeper? No, I mean, no, we're going to go deeper. We gotta come up with something that allows us to do. There's got to be a better way to do this. Can you talk a little bit about how you found the central questions in your life and in your business?
Well, we've always tried to be very open to listening to what it is that the scientists want to, where they want to go, what they want to accomplish. So, back in the day, I think Sylvia has a famous story of Ed Link building one of the first submersibles, a 3-person submersible, and he just went out and built it because he could. But then he came back around to her and said, "So I've got this sub here, do you think it might be of use to you?" And she had to kind of figure out, like, well, it doesn't really do this and it doesn't really do that, but I can kind of get it to work in certain ways. And we've learned great transportation. So we've taken a different approach, and we really work towards this collaborative effort right from the beginning. Whether they're scrawling it on a napkin or a quad pad or whiteboard or whatever it is, and just have, kind of go from that sort of round table of this is everything we'd like to be able to do, and then trying to figure out a practical way to do it that's both cost effective and increasingly of importance, at least to our company, is what happens to that equipment at life end. We really look to make material selections and so forth that we feel can be recycled readily, that are not just going to be sort of existent in the environment forever. And so we kind of think about it in a whole body way. Even when we were faced with this really crazy vehicle, the scientists came to us and they said, well, we'd like to build this vehicle that can go through a 24-inch hole that we want to bore 1,000 meters through the ice. And then when it gets underneath the ice, we want the vehicle to open up, and it's going to carry a bunch of sensors and take samples and stay down there for like 10 days at a time, and then bring all the samples back.
Through a 24-inch
hole. And
like 1 kilometer deep.
1 kilometer deep. And so we built,
like a big tube.
That's a tube, right? And so we built this sub-ice rover, and it really looked like a little pencil going down the tube. But then when it had to get underneath the ice, it was a hydraulic vehicle, so it used the hydraulic pressure to sort of spring open,
like a transformer toy.
Like a transformer, and all of its thrusters had to unfold, and it so it could go around underneath.
Yeah, what 20?
It ended up with about 27 different sensors plus manipulators and cameras and a variable buoyancy system, because we didn't know what we would encounter under there with the different salinity because of the ice melt. You could get into an area that was very brackish, or you could get into a pocket that was highly saline, and the vehicle could suddenly the buoyancy could change, and
stuck.
It could be stuck. There's all kinds of challenges to overcome, but it was built successfully, and we built a lot of other sensors and tools that could also go through even smaller boreholes, so we could really get kind of a holistic look at what was going on underneath the ice shelf. And then these guys from another university came along, and they had what they called the skinny ROV. And the skinny it was very skinny. It was very small, but it had a very short tether, and it could only operate over a very limited bandwidth. And so we had another tool that we had built that had kind of a brain area at the top of the array. And so we worked with them to, again, collaborating to figure out how we could integrate skinny to our top end, which was attached to a very long, like a 1,500 meter long armored cable. And so we integrated skinny to that, and they lowered skinny down the skinny hole, and it was like an 8-inch borehole on that one. And they found fish that they had no idea that there would be any kind of life there at all, and they didn't expect it. So then they were trying to,
because this is not only under a kilometer of ice, with a few meters of water below before actually reaching the sea floor. There's a little bit of space, of wet space, ocean space, but it's far distant from the ocean itself.
Right. So it's very dark, very dynamic.
How many kilometers from the
It varied. I mean, like
from the Antarctica.
pieces keep falling off, so it changes all the time. But
Yeah, right. That's true.
But it was.
And can I ask how you build a team around this? Because you obviously needed some very specialized skills. So you make it sound like we just kind of went for it, but this is complicated stuff. I mean, can you just say a few words? I don't mean to get too practical here, but how do you pull the team together?
Well, I think that, a lot of our like long-term employees tend to be a little bit ADHD, they like to not have to do the same thing too many times, and they're very good at kind of just innovating. But we've had a small group that's worked very closely together, and we do sort of like bounce ideas off each other and kind of say, this is completely mad, but let's see what we can do with it. And it's really that being open to the collaborative process that helps, because somebody may have a wild idea, but it can really work. But again, coming back to those, like you say, kind of those fundamental pillars of how can we build it cost effectively? How can we, what is the material science behind it? Can we pick materials that we can recycle at the life end of it, or that could be easy to repair in the field, and kind of trying to give ourselves some parameters that we could look at on kind of a recurring basis really does help us to refine and be successful in these things, kind of these common architectural pieces that we can then bring to bear in new ways.
I think one of the keys to the success of DOER is that everybody who's there gets out in the ocean.
Yeah.
It's not just theoretical, it's hands-on. So
that's part of why they're part of this, right? That's
right.
We want that. Yeah.
We had a well, NASA gave us they gave us an engineer at one point. He kind of came through Mission Blue, and they said, well, go over to DOER, and this is a guy, he'd only really ever worked on like the tiles of the space shuttle, but he never really got to work on the whole creature, and so when we kind of threw him in to mess around with the sub-ice rover, he just thought it was the coolest thing that he got to like work on a vehicle where he could kind of see the whole thing, the whole system, and be kind of a part of that. And so he went back after 6 months. He went back to NASA, and he was like a changed man. He was able to get people to collaborate in ways they never did before. So he really enjoyed that, being able to kind of like come out of a very regimented, narrow space and be kind of flung into our little team of doers, and he really benefited from it.
Love it. And the point that's all obviously connected to this that Sylvia made earlier, it's like we put as many people on the moon as we have roughly as we've had to the bottom of the deep ocean. And it's so, I think people often think of these things as very asymmetric, right? One's easy and one's hard, and it's sort of like, no, these things are really hard.
They really are.
Pulling these things off. One last, practical question, and that is, when I think about the financial risk of kind of going for this and then not succeeding, can you just say a word about, what financial risk did DOER face?
Yeah, they're significant. I mean, you really do have to kind of take the risks, and I can't tell you how many times we've had projects that were going merrily along, and then all of a sudden some crisis happens, and we have to really be able to be nimble and pivot to do kind of new things. I mean, even during the pandemic, where they kind of like unilaterally shut down businesses and said suppliers and so forth. Yeah. And we had one little company that we'd been doing some kind of contract work for, making parts for them, but they weren't really involved in underwater stuff per se, but they were more involved in kind of emergency communications. And then when COVID hit, they were considered essential because they needed to get connectivity into areas and expand connectivity so that people could be connected through Zoom and other platforms. And so for a little hiatus, we were like madly building telecommunications stuff. and it
paid the bills,
but it allowed us to stay partially open, and it allowed us to be really useful during the pandemic. But because we had that kind of ability to rapidly regroup and kind of pivot and see new opportunities, and being able to, again, applying things across different industries, I originally looked at this project, I thought it'd be really interesting for emerging island nations and for offshore communications, which is why I agreed to get involved with it in the first place. And then it just kind of led, one thing led to another, and it was very beneficial. And like just this afternoon, we ended up, before coming on this, I ended up sending a bunch of these units out to help with both the firestorms and with the aftermath of Ida. And so it's kind of coastal, and these things can be taken offshore, but it's that ability to kind of flip and turn and not just get too entrenched in and really kind of oppressed by a system. You have to maintain that flexibility and nimbleness, and
take advantage of those insights and knowledge for kind of adjacent challenges and questions and opportunities. That's
kind of look at it as kind of an like the whole body thing.
Yeah, it's nice. Hey, there's a wonderful question in the chat which I'm going to ask. Could you please share with us your reflection on environmental issues per se from what you may have seen in the deep ocean? So if you kind of think about,
I have to tell a story.
Please
go. So we built a 6,500 meter, actually 7,000 meter remotely operated vehicle for the University of Hawaii. Right now it's out somewhere between Oahu and Japan, investigating a bunch of undiscovered seamounts or believed seamounts and so forth. But a couple of years ago, during its commissioning, we took it on a test dive down to 4,000 meters or so, and we hit the seabed, and we were all excited. What cool things we're going to see, and we flipped on the lights and the camera, and we saw a Dasani water bottle, 4,000 meters.
Oh, yeah.
It was like laying there, all silvery and shiny, and labeled Dasani. And it was really awful. We had to collect it. We picked it up with a manipulator and got it off the seabed at least. But I mean, everywhere you go in the deep sea, there's evidence of remnants are there, and
detritus.
Detritus, yeah.
That's a great. And Sylvia, when you think about kind of the deep ocean, what are the things the reflections on that?
I think it's unusual for people to know, let alone grasp, the significance that most of life on Earth not only lives in the ocean, but lives in the dark. You get below 300, 400, 500 meters.
The twilight zone.
Yeah, you get into eternal darkness except for bioluminescence, which is magnificent. Edith Witter, who just has a new book out about her life's work, she says it's probably the most common form of communication on the planet, bioluminescence, the flash, sparkle, and glow of living light that characterizes most of the creatures in the deep sea. And we know it in terms of fireflies and glowworms and a few luminous mushrooms and whatever, but most of life on Earth is in the deep sea, below where light penetrates, below where photosynthesis occurs. And it's not only dark, the pressure increases the deeper you go, and it's cold, even in the tropics. If you get down to 300 meters, it's winter.
It's brisk.
And when you get down to the deepest parts of the ocean, it's about 4 degrees centigrade.
16,000 psi.
Yeah, the deepest part is 16,000 pounds per square inch, and life is there. That's the other great exciting thing. This is not just rocks and water that we're talking about. This is a living system, and it is connected. Everything, and it's not just the sustenance that is generated with photosynthesis in the sunlit upper portion of the ocean. Chemosynthesis may rival photosynthesis in terms of providing sustenance, conversion of materials to organic matter that drives the way the planet functions.
Mm.
And I think you asked what's notable, what about what I've witnessed. What I've witnessed is change.
Hmm.
Half the coral reefs basically are either gone or in sharp decline. And it's not just the coral reefs, again, in the sunlit portions of the ocean. And it's not just the trash you find throughout the ocean, from shallow to the deepest places. It's the absence of what was once common.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have a little tinge of fear about seeing a lot of big predators, sharks in the ocean. Why? Not because I have reason to, except that people said, you got to watch out. There are man-eaters out there, down there.
We didn't have to worry then.
No.
Yeah.
Some of us don't have to worry about man-eaters.
That's right.
You do, but
Yeah.
we don't. But nobody really has to worry about being bitten or eaten by sharks. The sharks have to worry about us consuming them. And it's not a lot of sharks in the ocean that now gives me cause for pause. It's the absence that makes me afraid. What are we doing to the ocean with the technology that enables us to find, capture, and market ocean wildlife on an industrial scale so comprehensive that it is really affecting the chemistry of the ocean? And we should worry about that. But identifying it, knowing it, is a good place to start. And once you know, you can do something. If you don't know, you can't care.
Yeah. And your earlier point about how much more we know than even very recently, right? I mean, many of the students that are listening to this have seen that recent report from the International Panel on Climate Change. And the idea is, look, we know a lot more about what's happening regionally, and, because there's data, there's events. Science has advanced a lot in this area just in the last 10 years.
Connecting data points.
Yeah.
And the earlier discussions and conferences and concerns about climate really didn't address the ocean at all. In Paris, the ocean was a footnote. The conference that took place in Spain, that was supposed to be in Chile, but got shifted, was known as the Blue COP. For the first time, the ocean began to be front and center. And the upcoming climate conference will definitely have a strong element of ocean. It seems so obvious once you put it into focus. Take away the ocean, there is no climate.
Yeah. And
take away life, and we don't. Think about how carbon capture and storage is a biological process. We're worried, and we should be, about the CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide emissions and trying to curb that excess. But if we fail to protect and restore the natural systems that govern planetary processes, we won't really solve the problem of climate or anything else. It's taken 4.5 billion years of the biogeochemical processes, with an emphasis on bio, shaping the geo and the chemical aspects of the planet that make the living earth that is hospitable for us. And when you think about how much we have consumed and still are, clear-cutting ancient forests, transforming these natural systems on the land, but it's taken, thousands of years to bring about the transformations we see on the land. It's taken us about 4.5 decades to unravel the ocean with the technologies that enable us to comprehensively extract not just enough fish to feed communities and families, but to make, taking wildlife by the ton and marketing them on an industrial scale and cutting the food webs, the nutrient cycles, the chemistry of the ocean. There was a great study commissioned by the International Monetary Fund that reported out in Davos at the World Economic Forum in 2020. And they did this study on the value of whales for their carbon and connecting it to climate. What are whales worth in terms of carbon and their value to climate? And they came up with a figure of on an order of $1 trillion for just the whales, their carbon capture and their ability not only to capture carbon through what they consume, and it goes back to sunlight and photosynthesis in the food webs, phytoplankton to zooplankton to bigger zooplankton, the krill and the small fish that are consumed by the whales, but the whales give back nutrients that power the phytoplankton. It's a system. And you have to have all the pieces. Well, think of what we've done to the whales in a few centuries, almost annihilated and came very close to bringing about the extinction of most of the great whales. But we changed, we turned the corner. We've looked at whales as something more than just pounds of meat and barrels of oil. And now to have the economists saying, follow the carbon.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, they usually just say follow the money, but now they're saying follow the carbon. If it works for whales, why isn't it working for tuna? Why isn't it working for krill and squid and all of the wild animals in the ocean? Blue carbon is what it's generally being called today. And blue carbon and the living carbon is getting a place at last on the balance sheet in the climate discussions.
But at the same time, there's now this renewed push as we're trying to, mitigate carbon emissions and so forth. There's this push to now extract from the deep sea.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Deep sea mining.
What do you just no, just stop. Full stop.
Yeah, full stop.
Full stop. Because again, they're looking at, cobalt, manganese, nickel, these so-called rare earth minerals. And when they're in the deep sea, they're formed around something like a fossil shark tooth or the ear bone of a whale. And they start just as around these little biological kernels. It's almost as if the ocean is producing a living pearl. And these microbial systems that form them, and the time that it takes for one of these nodules to get to be something like the size of a potato, that's literally millions of years in the making through a very complex biological process.
And they're alive. And that's the thing. They're not dead stones.
No,
These
it's
are
not
living.
like it's not like taking a piece of cobalt ore off the land. It's a completely different scenario. And yet, we talk about engineering these vehicles. Sometimes, we get these requests to and getting back to your question about the financial rewards or lack thereof, you get people that come along and they'll say, can you build this thing to go down and, just cherry pick these nodules off the bottom? And, absolutely we could do it. But could we, should we? And and oftentimes we just won't do it. We just no, we don't want to.
Like the deployment of the dispersants on the no.
One more short story. In the aftermath of the Macondo Deepwater Horizon spill, I'd worked with Dr. Bob B. there at Cal, and a part of his bigger team looking at sort of this disaster response and failure analysis and these kinds of things that went on there. But along the way, we got a phone call from some people that asked us if it was possible to build a deep water pump. They wanted to disperse or to dispense, metered amounts of fluid under high pressure and so on and so forth. And it sounded really intriguing and absolutely, cool to build it, doable. And then we found out that as the conversation went along, that what they really wanted to do was take the dispersant Corexit, which is a neurotoxin, really evil stuff. And they wanted to build a big bladder of this and then inject it at wellheads on the seabed so that the oil would never get to the surface. It would just be dispersed subsea. So the companies couldn't be fined because there'd be no way to quantify how much oil spilled. And, it was a super lucrative amount of money that they offered. And
Yes.
we just said, I'm sorry, we're not going to do it. And, we just walked away.
Yeah.
And I
What
mean,
was-
it's hard when you've got a small business and people are reliant on you to come up with their checks every month. And, but you couldn't live with yourself too.
Well, and your people that are part of your enterprise.
Yeah,
couldn't live with your enterprise either if you did it right. That's part of why
Yeah,
they're on your
part of the
team.
ethos. And, we've always conducted ourselves as sort of a B corporation, even
Exactly.
before that was a thing. And it really does make a difference in,
Yeah.
particularly as you're, going into sort of engineering careers. There's those moral choices that are coming
Yeah.
along increasingly more and more. And
Can we do it?
Yes.
Should
Yeah.
we do it?
No, fundamental. Just a quick, because so much of what you've said has been helpful to me, and I'm sure the students as well. I mean, one of the things that helps me just real quickly is I think people can look at you and hopefully many of the students that are on the call, there's this cognitive shift from they do that to I do that.
Mhm.
Right? I think people can hear your stories and they can't know that they could be as successful as you have been. But I think you provide access into a way of living and a way of being and a way of being thoughtful, being more mindful.
Right.
And, all of us, I think, are trying to get better at these things. But when that cognitive flip happens, it's sort of like from they do that to I do that. That's part of what the Changemaker curriculum and the Newton series is trying to do, is that sense of agency. It's like, yes, that can be me, is one piece. And so I thank you for that. And then, some of there are a bunch of questions, and I think we want to go to questions here pretty quickly. But one of the things we didn't get to is ocean access and the Catalina project and some of that other stuff. So so maybe you could talk just a little bit about the Catalina project, and then I will pop it into the questions because the students have put a number of them. So a little bit on that. Thank you.
Cool.
Yes, this is really cool. One of my little pet things I love to do is to reconnect art and science, because they've been so fundamentally slashed, especially, like in my academic career, it happened all the time, but they're naturally connected. And so we had a call from the artist, Doug Aitken, and he had this vision to create these big geometric forms that were going to be put underwater. And he had the vision for it. But he's like, well, we'll just put them in the water, and we want the seals and we want people to swim through them, and it's going to be cool. And it was really cool. But, there was all the things like permits from the Army Corps of Engineers and the Coastal Commission, and how much mooring weight do you need to keep these things submerged?
Yep.
And what are the currents and the tides and the potential, NOAA weather buoy is going to tell us about storms coming in. But these are the pavilions, the underwater pavilions, and we put them in. We actually got the permit from the Corps of Engineers, and we put them in at the Catalina Island Dive Park, which is a great venue. You can just walk right into the sea. The access is really thoughtful there. They want divers and snorkelers to come down,
And the sea lions.
and the sea lions. And so we
Entertained.
we tethered these sculptures underwater, and we built cameras and lights so we could monitor them real time, and we had all this cabling running back to the shore, and people love them, but the wildlife loved them even more. We had the sea lions would sort of barrel roll through and stop and look at themselves in the mirrors that were on the surfaces. We had the Garibaldi, which are it's the California state fish. It's this bright orange, really pugnacious fish. It's in the damselfish family.
Right.
And they're just fierce, and they'd come cruising through, and it's like, hey, there's another Garibaldi in here. I got to they like fight the mirror. It's like when your dog first encounters itself in the mirror, it has to bark at it, and just these great images, and then people just love them. And we can only get a permit to keep them in for a few months, unfortunately. But in that course of that time, the other thing that happened is that because of the variety of textures that the artist had envisioned for the pavilions, nudibranchs and other invertebrates that had not been seen at Catalina for decades somehow mysteriously showed up and occupied the pavilions.
Oh, nice.
And so they had like breeding colonies of these really weird little nudibranchs that had been sort of absent. And so when it came time to take them out, we were really torn, and we had to take them out because, you know, the permit was up and the Corps of Engineers wasn't going to give us any leeway. And so all the divers in the area and the dive masters and instructors, they all fell out, and they were meticulously picking these small animals, harvesting them all off of the pavilions, and returning them to the seabed as carefully as possible so that we didn't have, you know,
Mass destruction.
yeah, we didn't have collateral damage in taking them out. And then the moorings were repurposed and used within the sailing community down there, so they avoided having people trying to anchor and hitting the seabed. So they repurposed all the moorings, and the pavilions came out, and they are going to be kind of revamped and redisplayed at a future venue.
Nice.
Perhaps in more tropical waters this time.
Yeah. Well, and I'd imagine for you, it also triggers, you know, what's kind of 2.0 on that idea, right?
Yeah,
Something
exactly.
comes in over the transom and you realize, wow, that had some really interesting properties.
Oh yeah, it did. When we had one situation where, you know, we tried to tether them or, you know, moor them in where it was easy enough for some snorkelers to reach them as well as divers.
Yeah.
And then, of course, out of the blue comes sort of this really wicked winter storm. And so you kind of get the phone call, like, you know, get down here and deal with these moorings and, you know, deal with these pavilions. And so we had to send a team down and get down there, and we just kind of sank them in deeper water till the storm passed. But it was kind of sketchy. We got it done though.
But before we dive into the questions, just one observation that many of the things that Liz has been describing have been reactive. That is, people come with a problem that needs to be solved, and you jump on it and you come up with a solution. But being proactive, what do we really want to do that can transform access to the sea? Taking all the opportunities that are out there now. So the development of a system using glass to ultimately go to the deepest part of the ocean with a pressure sphere.
Any part of the ocean.
Yeah, any part of the ocean that's clear and can withstand pressure.
Yeah.
It's a vision. It hasn't yet become reality, but using the other clear materials that are used for submersible hulls, the Deep Hope submersibles are in the works.
Nice.
They go to 1,000 meters, but why not 11,000 meters? Why not all the way?
Right.
It's our ocean. It's not our ocean. It's the ocean.
Yeah.
And we need to have access to it.
Yeah.
I just love your ability to paint pictures that people can see, so to help people see the whole frame and not just this frame, and also to articulate it, to bring it back. And we'll go to the questions too. Communication matters, right? Getting people energized and flying in formation aimed at a target that matters. Being able to frame and reframe and help people see what they can't see, and it's you know,
directly access the ocean too,
and regard ourselves in fresh ways. To reuse your phrase, I turn it back over to Vicky. I think the questions will get asked through Vicky or the team.
Yeah, we have a ton of questions, and you can start to see the students coming on to ask questions. I have one student who's in the library, and I'm going to ask a question for him, and it kind of goes back a little bit to what Rich was saying, and frankly, Sylvia, what you were saying, and it's for you. It's from Ruibo. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And it's, hi, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Could you please share how does having a doctor's degree in psychology impact your experience as a marine biologist and as an explorer?
Well, I just love all forms of life, from the tiniest little specks to the biggest whales. But I got fascinated with the seaweeds, if you will, the marine algae, largely because I looked over the shoulder of one of the professors, first at Florida State, and then he migrated to Duke. And so I migrated to Duke to work with him as his student. And it just realizing that this is what drives life, if you will, photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, where would we be? Would be a planet driven perhaps by chemosynthesis, but it's that magical process that not only fixes carbon, creates food, but generates oxygen as a byproduct. It's taken a very long time to transform rocks and water into a habitable planet where, the atmosphere we breathe. Thank you, photosynthesis. Thank you, life in the ocean. Thank you, gazillions of years that preceded the present time.
Prochlorococcus.
Prochlorococcus is one. Exactly.
Yeah.
The tiny blue-green bacterium, formerly known as blue-green algae, that wasn't discovered until 1986. And now we know, thanks to Penny Chisholm and her colleagues at MIT, who found a new way to measure photosynthesis in the ocean in clear ocean water off Bermuda. It looks like water as clear as this, but it's loaded with critters. And Prochlorococcus turns out to contribute maybe as much as 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. It's been around for a very long time, variations on the theme of this microscopic organism. So I just fell in love, not just with the beauty of these amazing creatures, from the tiniest ones through giant kelp and all this various other forms of photosynthetic organisms in the ocean, but that they provide homes and food, shelter for many other forms of life. In fact, they're critical. And then I had to start justifying, oh, so you're interested in whales? Well, you're a phycologist. What is it about whales that goes back to your being a specialist with seaweeds? And I said, well, whales have barnacles on their chin or on their fins or on their back, and there's little seaweeds growing on the barnacles. So I really want to know.
It's just a substrate. The whale's just a substrate.
The whale's an island.
It's an
But
island.
actually, I don't think you need to justify shifting from one focus to another. We're human beings. It's nice to have a centerpiece of something that you're pretty good at and that in considerable detail. I mean, Charles Darwin studied barnacles and got to know them really well. Ed Wilson studies ants. Now, I got to know and still do know and work with seaweeds, but you find that they all connect, and everything does connect to everything else. And you really don't have to make a big deal of it. If your interest shifts to bats, great, go for it.
I bet you there's an algae that grows on bats.
Yeah.
I think there is. So you are a phycologist, not a psychologist. Phycology. So everybody
I'm
knows
sorry.
that's the study of algae.
YC, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I got in print, I've been called a marine psychologist, and I know nothing about the psychology of marines.
Well, on that note, it is my pleasure to introduce Geeta. Please ask your question.
Yes, hello.
Next time.
Thanks, Sylvia and Liz, for the presentation, and thanks, Rich and Victoria, for organizing it, because it's the first time I know that much information about the ocean. So I'm so happy to hear. Can you hear me? Sorry, I think that's okay. So I'm really happy to participate to this session. But then I have a question to Dr. Sylvia. I watched the video of a TEDx that you gave, and on the video it was you were saying that today humans, today, back in 2009, because it was the year where the TEDx happened, people consume 90% of the total big fishes in the ocean. And today, since then, and through the NGO, you're trying to discover more and more surfaces of the ocean. So don't you think that the fact of opening this door to human will only give them access to more and more nature that they can destroy? And don't you think that it's more interesting to keep it as it is, keep it secret, so that humans don't, consume it as they are consuming today all the environmental resources that we have? Thank you.
Well, we are at that point where either we will shift, look at the evidence, make different choices about what we take from nature and how we take from nature, or we're going to lose the chance. You know, I'm not alone in saying the next 10 years will be a defining point in history. The climate scientists say you've got about 10 years. With what we do or what we fail to do will shape the next 10,000 years in a magnified way. I mean, every year, everything we do all the time impacts everything, you know, but this is, as never before, a moment where we're close to tipping points. Either we will continue moving in the same direction and go over the edge on some critical elements of planetary functions, the systems that keep us alive, our life support system, or we will pull back in time. And some of the solutions that are being offered are engineering solutions. Can we quickly draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? But at the same time, we must look at the natural carbon capturing methods, mechanisms, trees, phytoplankton in the ocean, the whole web of life. And we know that it works when you give nature a break. Change in a positive way can happen. Even some of our great engineering structures, dams, to harness the water systems for agriculture, for power, for this purpose or that purpose. But sometimes we have gone a bit too far. And some dams that were created for a purpose 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, no longer serve that purpose. Or now we find that a free river, a free flowing river, serves us better than one that is harnessed and blocks other processes that are important. So take away the dams from the rivers and you can see miraculous positive change in so many instances. An organization called American Rivers in this country is really helping out in that respect. And you know, just look at all what we consume. Mostly consuming ocean wildlife is a choice. It's generally not a necessity. For some it is, give them a break. But for most of us, you know, first of all, wildlife is not really free. There is a cost to the system, cost to everybody everywhere. We account for wildlife from the ocean as free goods, zero accounting base. A dead fish is worth more because you can sell it than a live fish swimming in the ocean because it's just
There.
Anyway, it's a perception thing. We learn that fish are okay to take with abandon. But now we can learn something else, that we need them alive in the ocean. They're part of the carbon cycle. And think about it ethically and morally, what we do to fish as compared to what we've begun to have empathy for other animals. We still treat farmed animals in a way that's, well, I wouldn't want to be a cow or a chicken or a pig or a sheep, quite frankly. Given the way
worse to be a fish.
But it is worse to be a fish. We're at that point where what we now know can take us to a better place if we have the will to apply the knowledge and to lace it with an ethical concern and a moral concern, to have empathy for the creatures in the sea in a comparable way that we have come in a relatively short period of time to have an empathy for whales and empathy for birds. Before Jane Goodall spent 15 years getting to know chimpanzees very well and had the courage to stand up to a scientific community that heaped scorn on her for daring to give them names and think of them as communities with social behavior, a kind of language with feelings and expressions, and that it matters. People just looked at chimpanzees as objects, the way we tend to look at many other forms of life, without that thing that we think of as special to being human, to be humane about our treatment of one another and other forms of life. We have the capacity to shape a world that is really a place that is going to be better than what we have today. Not just for one another, but anchored in our respect for life across the board, and to treat one another with dignity and respect, but to extend that to the rest of life on Earth. It is truly possible as never before, but the moment is now. And if we wait much longer, we'll lose the chance. That's why I'm excited about being a 21st century human being. You know, this is the time. We've got a chance to go from this to this. And what's more exciting than that?
This is a sweet spot in civilization. I think I heard somebody say that once. Yep.
Armed with a superpower of knowing, of knowledge.
We have students so interested in being in this sweet spot. So we have about 13 questions. We probably won't get to every one of the questions, but let's get to as many as we can. I think Rishi, the next person was Rashid.
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity to ask this question. One of my things I was curious about, you both talked a lot about the different technologies and the the good applications of them, especially in deep sea. And then you were talking about the people trying to spill oil and some other applications. I was curious, what kind of crossovers have you seen between, aerospace technology and deep ocean technology? And whether you really feel like there is a chance that technology can help us improve the quality of the ocean and maybe even negate some of our impacts.
Yeah, so there are some analogous things, where there's always you're always looking for the most strength and the least weight, both in aerospace and in subsea applications. We work with a lot of the same materials. We work with a lot of aluminums and some composites, and we're getting more into 3D printed pieces that we can use, but we're subjecting them to pressure testing versus some of the testing that goes on for aerospace. But there are some definite synergies between the two. But it's really interesting when we're looking at some of the different tools that we have in the box. So we have remote vehicles, we have the robotic vehicles, the human occupied vehicles, and they all have different kinds of roles to play. So we kind of see some analogies there where we're seeing more people using kind of drone technologies versus human occupied aircraft, for instance, for some sort of considered more hazardous missions. But I think that there's a lot of real value in having people with that kind of direct working access to the ocean, because so often we just see the surface of the ocean and it looks great to everybody all the time, and you see the sunset on it, little sailboats going along. But unless you really have that opportunity to go directly for yourself and to have that experience of being, kind of down in the submersible and seeing the bioluminescence happening, and all of a sudden a 7-foot swordfish comes, rocketing past, and then it stops and comes back to check you out. There's just some fundamental things that are just transformative. And it again, going back to aerospace, the experience that some people come back with the very first time. I think everybody remembers the very first time they've been up in an airplane, and how cool that is to look down on, and they all look like ants down there, but to have that, and some people who've never been on an airplane, even they get to be an adult, and they get on an airplane and they're kind of terrified at the first thing, and then they're really fascinated by it. But it gives them that sort of, we call it like the God's eye view of what's going on. And in the ocean, it's much harder for us to get that view. So that's where the human occupied submersibles are an enormous benefit. But so are the autonomous vehicles, which can help us to build a map of the area. And then the remotely operated vehicles and some of the live streaming that's now possible, so that more people are able to feel that they can participate in the expeditions. The Lulukai ROV that's out working off Hawaii right now is doing some live streaming. And then these are the HOV 1000s that we're building for the Deep Hope organization. And they're each 3-person submersible, an acrylic sphere, which has at least a 20+ year lifespan. So kind of a durable use of plastic, which we will repurpose in the end for other
Make great
applications.
salad bowls too.
Well, they make nice tranquility spheres. But there's all kinds of things we can do with them. And you'll see down in the corner, the fellow there in the DOER t-shirt, he's got a big camera housing that we built for the Blue Planet people when they were doing all those incredible films, cinematography. So we built an ABS classed cinematographic camera housing for use on human occupied submersibles because of the potential for these large cinema cameras. It's a really large implodable volume. You don't want that going off next to your acrylic sphere or causing an explosion. So again, some of those similar things with aerospace, you've got to think about what happens if something explodes next to our aircraft. Can it take those concussive forces, or how can we engineer it to the accessories to be as strong and fully classed, just like the portion that's holding the human people.
And all the life support functions.
And the life support functions.
Whether you're high in the sky or deep in the sea.
Yeah, so there's a lot of crossover. And so we see a lot of, in fact, I've had astronauts, we've trained astronauts in submersibles, and we've had them come and sit in the little model of the submersible we have at the shop. And then they're like, well, could you just like reverse pressurize this for us? And, it'd be really cool. Like, no, we'll do something completely new, but you just can't just do that now. So
thanks for that question. I think we'll keep on going through questions just so you all know we ask for feedback on our speakers. And so I'm going to post a link. And as the questions are being asked, I'll also share the link. So the next question, Robbie.
Okay.
You sound like you are in the ocean.
There's a whale going by.
Okay.
Or a ship. It's a ship.
Am I?
There
Can
you
you
go.
hear me? Okay. I just had you briefly discussed it, but I was wondering if you could just discuss the business model of DOER and kind of how you balance being profitable with being ethical. And also sort of what clients do you guys tend to work with?
As I mentioned, we do kind of conduct ourselves as a B Corp. So, we're making the most amount of money is not the top priority. It's really more about making enough to keep us going, keeping the engine going, but it's more about making a difference. And so it is, it's not, we never expect to have an IPO. We never expect to.
You have to make money to be a business.
Right. You have to make money to be a business, but
there's a line you don't cross.
Right. So there's a line, yeah, absolutely. Like the, the Corexit pump, we're just not doing that, or the vehicles to scour the seafloor for deep sea, for manganese nodules, we're not doing that one either. But so it's just it's a very basic model. It's just a traditional small business model, and we are very project based. So it's always a bit of a hustle. You've got to be looking for the major large projects that are going to kind of carry through, but again, maintaining the nimbleness to be able to flex and take smaller projects all along the way. It kind of serves us well in these very adverse times, but also it allows us to uphold our standards of being broadly beneficial and looking for collaboration across different industries. So, we have the capacity to do small prototyping work for people. And, we've built everything from inline roller skate chassis to, submersibles. So having that flex and ability to be open to collaboration and not too narrow of a focus has served us well.
That's great. Thanks for that question, Robbie. Oliver.
Hello, thank you for speaking today. It's been really amazing. But I've worked at Triton Submarines for 6 months. I'm sure you guys know as
Yeah.
Cameron, yeah. And with things like having a commercially available submarine that is certified to full ocean depth, do you see there being dangers to that in terms of like deep water tourism and things like that? I know it's an uncharted territory, but is it a bit dangerous to kind of have things that are certified to this depth available commercially if people haven't explored it enough scientifically? Sorry about the noise behind me.
No worries. I don't think that the greatest danger, the things that typically go wrong, no matter what you're engineering, boil down to arrogance and hubris and complacency, the three pillars of disaster. We saw it with the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster. It's just that kind of complacency that seeps in if you're not paying attention all the time to all the rules and the regulations. They're there for a reason. And, we do see we have seen over the years a lot of experimental craft that people come up with. And, they go out there and they do their thing and they trust their engineering. But at the end of the day, you never want to have that happen with, it's like the difference or the difference between having an experimental aircraft and one that's fully certified by the FAA. Which one do you want to put your family in? And so if you're doing a commercial enterprise, it's absolutely imperative that we follow and adhere to the rules and the conventions that are there to make sure that whatever depth we're exploring is done safely. And with submersibles, oddly enough, it's usually like the first 100 feet where the things go wrong. Once the pressure tends to really, if it's engineered correctly and you've done all the math and the rules, follow the rules, then the deeper you go, kind of the stronger some materials become.
Sorry, I meant also in terms of more like the possible danger of the ecosystems that are down there to the ecosystems that are down there.
Okay. Well, again, it's taking care and having that respect for what the ethic of it. We've seen, lately there's been this sort of push to take tourists to the Titanic. It's like, why are you going to the Titanic? It's just a sunken boat, sure, it's fascinating and interesting, but there's been a lot of video of it. I could see some worth going back to watch it decompose over time, but if you go back to the same places over and over again, there certainly is the potential to cause disruptions. You have to be careful of like the use of your thrusters to disrupt those very fine sediments. So it does take care and again, empathy and concern for the animals. The lighting systems are another big one. You got animals are in the dark all the time. Do you really want to blast them with 10,000 watts of LED light? So there's a lot of time and consideration that we take in developing systems where we think about what impact will it have on the lives of these animals. Are they going to be permanently blinded because we decided to turn on the big lights, or can we take some care and design things with these systems in mind and causing like a doctor, first do no harm.
I love the idea that little submersibles are becoming more widespread for tourism and getting people who otherwise wouldn't know what the ocean is like beneath the surface. There are people who don't want to get wet, but they will get into a submarine.
Or they have issues with their ears. They have, whatever health issues that prevent them from becoming scuba divers.
And I think we want to democratize access to the sea for sure. But it's also a matter of concern that if something goes haywire with a system that's not certified, then it really puts a damper, is one word to put.
Damper, great. Yeah.
on the whole idea of going into the ocean. It becomes something that the people are afraid of. Actually, there have been very few problems with submersibles, nothing like the magnitude of disasters that happen by going up in the sky.
Right.
When there is a problem, most often the submersible can drop weights or otherwise return gently to the surface. there's no gentle returning to the surface when you're up in the sky.
And gravity doesn't like that. No.
No. So, but
A question for you all. I know we're getting toward the bottom of the hour and we have so many questions to
All right.
go. Would you be able to stay for another 10 minutes?
Sure.
That's incredibly generous. I want to let the students also know that our next class is our orientation class. It'll be a meeting, not a webinar. The reason for that is so that we can actually meet each other as much as one can in Zoom. So it's not the webinar link, it's a meeting link. So make sure to look at bCourse and we'll keep on going through questions. Thank you very much, Oliver, for your question. And Gurnor, and you're up next. And I ask anybody if we've mispronounced your name, I've mispronounced your name, please just tell us how to pronounce it.
Sure. Thank you so much, first off, for speaking today. It was, very inspiring. My name is Gurnor. I'm a freshman here at Berkeley, and I've actually been running my own social impact venture for the past year now. We work in the waste management space. And so my question to the both of you would be that once naturally a business starts to grow and scale, how do you as founders of your own organization and businesses maintain that fine line and equilibrium between the values and morals the company's been founded on and the potential for profitability?
I think it depends, first of all, on what your goal is for your company.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been a part of a number of very large Fortune 500 companies on their board. Shareholder value, growing the company. It's about the bottom line. It's about making profit. But always there is within that these enterprises, there are places that you draw the line. There are things that are unethical. Certainly the legal framework that constrains going, not just about making money, but you've got to do what you do within the framework of society. But I think you should speak for yourself. But when I became involved with engineering, it was first deep ocean engineering, deep ocean technology, and then starting DOER, that now is totally with Liz and Ian and the crew that you have assembled around you. I think the goal was to develop systems to gain access to the sea. That it was the purposeful motivation was to be able to solve problems that otherwise weren't being solved. It's to, you want to be able to go and do things that currently aren't doable. So how do you get it done? You team up with engineers, you find the resources and you do it. It's a great thing about this country, that you have the freedom to start from scratch with an idea and make it happen. My goal is, I mean, it's nice to make money, for heaven's sakes. It gives you choices about what to do. But the real thing is to make a difference, that you achieve what you were looking for. And balancing the books, you've got to be able to make enough money to keep going and projects that are within your capacity. But if your goal is really just about making money, then that's a whole different mindset. It's not my mindset. Nice to make money, but it's not the real endpoint of the business. It should
sort of be a byproduct of what you really want to do.
Right, exactly.
All right, thank you so much.
Jalen, you're up next.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. The conversation has been super eye-opening. So I am a third-year major here, a third-year economics major. And so for me, when I think of capitalism, it's never been the most sustainable thing. And like you said, Dr. Earle, it's all about making profit. So all of that being said, how do you see the human consumption level tangibly becoming more ethical, given the fact that our overconsumption has become so normalized in first and second world countries?
Well, looking at the ocean, we need to adjust our accounting to match the reality. To regard wild animals as free goods with a zero accounting base takes you very quickly to a very bad place. We've stripped the ocean of life because it's all free. Just go out and get it. And more than that, now there are subsidies, billions of dollars of subsidies that assist those who would go out into the ocean and find, capture, and market the free goods that are out there. And it's accelerating getting to this very bad place of disrupting our life support system, the planetary processes that keep us alive. Now, part of why we are at this place is that we, throughout all of our history, have taken nature for granted, whether it's the air or the water or the land, and certainly the wild creatures who populate the earth. But, I mean, here's the big but. We're at a different point. As never before, we can see what was not seeable before, know what was not knowable before. This is the first time in the history of humankind that we've been able to see ourselves in perspective, that we're a part of nature, we're not apart from it. And what we do to our life support system matters. Now, I don't know whether we can change our perspective in time, but I am optimistic that we can. After all, who would go back to 2010, who would imagine that people would stop flying? Like, boom, we're not going to fly anymore. Why? Because there's something that threatens our existence, and we have to change our behavior. All the things that humans have done in response to COVID-19, like overnight. Why? Our existence is threatened. Your life is on the line. So you change, doing things, changing your behavior in ways that 6 months before you would think impossible. So once people understand, as I think they're beginning to understand, the changing climate, the loss of the diversity of life on the planet that holds the planet steady, knowledge that we now have that our existence, our lives are on the line. Once that really clicks, once you see it, change comes rather quickly and rather easily. It's knowing that really will get us over from this time of complacency, this time of getting really close to the line, but not yet over the line, that we have a chance to stabilize, to go from decline to recovery, to finding this enduring place for ourselves within the natural systems that make Earth, make life, make our existence possible. And it's the first time that not only can we see that our lives, our existence is on the line, but that we can change. We just did it. We're doing it right now. We're doing it. That we're not in everyday life in 2021 doing what everybody kind of took for granted in 2018. Wasn't that long ago. So by 2030, can we make the shift? It is possible. It's within our grasp. We just have to take it seriously and realize that today's Earth is not the same planet that existed 50 years ago, when many of the laws that were put into place enabling the extraction of minerals from the earth, the extraction of oil and gas, we didn't think that it could cause a problem. In fact, it was giving us prosperity, or that taking wildlife from the ocean could have any limits. We thought the ocean was too big to fail. But now we know not only that it can, but it is. And there are consequences that we can address, and we can do it in our everyday lives. It's the only way that it will work. I mean, we need new laws. We need to have new ways of thinking, but mainly we need you, me, everybody, all around 8 billion of us, more or less, to shift gears.
Yeah.
We have to.
And I think there's going to be real, again, very significant economic opportunities in achieving those, because, you know, instead of just having like a fishing fleet that's subsidized and oil and gas that's subsidized, you know, maybe we start using that money and creating opportunities for, particularly for small businesses, community businesses, trusts, things like this that can make tangible differences in their where they are, you know. and you know, one of the big ones I think is looking at, you know, fresh water. You know, here in California, you know, we're in the drought now, but look at the, you know, the billions of gallons of water that is sitting around that has been contaminated through our activities over the last century, and it's just sitting there. We have all this contaminated water sitting at Fukushima. We have, you know, manure ponds. We have all these wastewater, the mining waste. You know, why can't we put our engineering brains together and figure out ways that we can actually reclaim and clean and restore these water systems? You know, there's these big things to be,
systems.
Our plumbing systems, you know, why are we flushing our toilets with fresh water every day? Why are we turning that into, you know, fuel and biochar and you know, replenishing the natural systems that sustain us? And so it's just
opportunities.
These opportunities are here, they're everywhere. And you know, we just have to, you know, we can't, it's like sort of mind blowing to think of them all at once, but you kind of break them into these smaller pieces, solutions, and then, but retain that flexibility to draw on what others are doing and to pull in those collaborative webs. Then you really can start to shift in very positive ways quickly, and you know, make an enduring future.
Food security is not
food security. Oh,
yeah.
A whole other topic.
So much is wasted. We don't really need to consume ocean wildlife, with some exceptions, but mostly it is a choice.
We could have a food forest at Cal, though.
What's that?
We should have a food forest at Cal. You know, we should. Everybody should be out there getting some trees going and, you know, gardening. Get rid of those lawns.
There's a lot we can do, and I think there are a ton of ideas out here. I mean, I feel bad we haven't gotten to everybody's question. Rishi, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add. Nice to see you.
I think overall, just thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
It has been stunning. To the students, thank you for staying. I had written no need to stay later than 6:30, but there's so many great questions. But more than that, to our speakers, Dr. Earle, Liz Taylor, and to Dean Lyons, what an incredible treat, and what incredible thought-provoking you know, understanding what the problems are, a way to start and kick off our semester. I encourage also students who might want to continue this conversation. I think there's a way of being involved. Maybe Liz, you have an idea, or Dr. Earle, you have something to say?
Well, you know, I'm always open to hearing from students.
Alameda, come to Alameda.
We're over to Alameda. You know, anybody that wants to, you know, learn to be a diver, we've got dive classes. And
interns are welcome.
Interns are welcome to the extent that I can support them. And Sylvia and I, you know, we have our kind of bi-monthly dive in program where we talk about crazy topics. And one of our next guest is going to be Edie Witter. And we'll be talking about bioluminescence, and then we're going to have Dawn Wright later in September talking about GIS systems and why they matter.
How do we sign up for that?
Go to the Ocean Elders website. Our sponsor is Ocean Elders, and I'll share information with you, Vicki, so you can distribute it to the group.
I'll do that.
And of course, through Mission Blue, you know, Sylvia's organization.
Based up in Napa.
In Napa, but it's the San Francisco global. Bay is a hope spot.
Yes,
so there's lots of opportunities for students at Cal to get involved there, and
yeah, for sure.
You know, get out and help with some of the ongoing studies that the hope spot in San Francisco Bay is is working on, and then, you know, from wherever you live or wherever your family is from, there may be a hope spot there, or nominate one.
There are 100 and almost 140 around the world. So you can become a champion or help with many places, some here in California, but literally all over the world. I just have to say for the record that I spent much of my shutdown time over the past year plus 2 years working on a National Geographic book. It's Ocean, a Global Odyssey that celebrates a lot of movers and shakers, innovators. Dozens of people are profiled. How do we know what we know about the ocean? Well, here are the individuals who have been asking and answering questions, including Edie Witter. She's one of the targets in there, plus a lot of great sea stories.
Right. So that comes out in November, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have copies over at DOER in our little dive shop.
Thank you, Rishi, for posting that. I had to look up how to spell Odyssey. On that note, Rich, I don't know, I'll give you the last word if you would like it. And I look forward to seeing the students next Tuesday.
Well, look, I'm as inspired as the students are. I think this larger transformation, this challenge response mechanism, as we move from a more shareholder-based capitalism to a more stakeholder-based capitalism, and I think you're helping to create the kinds of mindset. You know, these big companies need you to want to work for them, and if they're not doing the right things, that's one of the things they have to factor in. So you do play a role even that way. But I'll close with this thought, because it really just comes directly from what the two of you said. Someone once said to me,